Hi everyone, and welcome to you all joining us from around the country for this afternoon's event. Today we're here to talk about implementing inclusion in the workplace, and we're finally able to get this event across the line. We had it ready to go in March before the first lockdown, and then once again in August before the second one. So we're really happy to be here with you all today. My name is Nick Molson. I'm the chair of the Emerging Talent Network's Auckland Committee, and I'm also a project manager based up here in Auckland. A huge welcome to those who are joining us from the Women's Infrastructure Network today. We're really happy to have you as part of this conversation and valued partnership with the Emerging Talent Network. The Emerging Talent Network was initiated by Infrastructure New Zealand around 3 years ago now as a means to elevate younger and future leaders to the industry's conversations. We primarily run in-person events, although that's been increasingly hard this year. But we're looking to help build industry networks for young people across disciplines and also have a few really new exciting developments in the pipeline as well. Before we get started today, I just wanted to do a little bit of a plug for Infrastructure New Zealand's marquee event of the year, also postponed a couple of times thanks to COVID, but Building Nations will be held here in Auckland on the 18th and 19th of November. For those of you from the Emerging Talent Network who are joining us today, tickets are selling like hotcakes and they are heavily discounted for Emerging Talent Network members. And so I would highly encourage you to speak with your organizations and get on to those. It's going to be a great event. And I certainly have enjoyed it for the past 2 years that I've joined. For those of you who might be looking for alternate ways to get involved with Building Nations, the Emerging Talent Network is hosting an essay competition, and entries for that close this Sunday on the 4th of October. We've had a few really cool entries in so far, and we're really looking forward to reviewing those with our expert panel of judges. And then the final plug is for our upcoming Inner Circle session. These are small 8 to 12 person events held with sort of industry leaders, typically around the CEO level or thereabouts. And coming up in the back end of October, we've got a session with Colin Crampton, which we're really looking forward to. So keep an eye out on your inboxes for an invitation to that. I'd now like to hand over to my fellow committee member, Alex, who will be facilitating this afternoon's panel discussion. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Nick. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko auraki toku moka, ko tūtai ka weto toku awa, ko tāki timu toku waka, ko kaitahu, ko Ngāti Tūwharetoa, ko luwhi oku iwi, ko Alex Saifiti toku ingoa. Kia ora koutou, my name is Alex Saifiti and I am a committee member of the Emerging Talent Auckland. Thank you, Nick, again for that introduction. It's a privilege to be moderating a discussion which has been a long time in the making. This afternoon, we're lucky enough to have 3 wahine toa, each in their own respective fields, sharing with us their experience implementing inclusion in the workplace. 2020 has been a year of unprecedented change and uncertainty. The world has been faced with a pandemic, continual signs of climate change, economic uncertainty, and growing inequities. Throughout this, the importance of inclusion and diversity has not changed. If anything, now is the time to ensure our workplaces and our communities reflect the world we want to see. This afternoon's session will begin with a presentation from each of our panelists and finish with a question and answers. Please feel free to send through your questions and we'll do our best to answer these. We hope you can take tangible action from our conversation today and continue implementing change in the workplace. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panelists for this afternoon, Prutha Reddy. Prutha, or Pru, is a people advisor in the WSP New Zealand team. She has a background in STEM with a master's degree in science and over the past 5 years has worked in human resources in the public and private sector. Pru is a generalist HR practitioner working towards specialisation in employment relations and change management. She's an integral member of the WSP Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Group and also is part of the inaugural VIBE committee that aims to improve inclusion of the LGBTQ+ community at WSP New Zealand. Pru had the privilege of being the lead person in WSP's journey to achieving the Rainbow Tick, and believes that every individual should be able to be who they are without fear in the workplace. I'd now like to pass it to Prue.
Thank you, Alex, for that introduction. And thank you for the invite to this presentation. I'm looking forward to just having a conversation and responding to any questions as we go through. So what I've thought I'm going to just talk about is a little bit about WSP's journey so far, especially over the last couple of years towards diversity and inclusion and what we're looking forward to in 2021. As Alex said, 2020 has been an interesting year, but we believe we've made some good steps towards achieving what we thought we could do this year. So WSP essentially restarted, I should say, looking at the infrastructure of how we are delivering our D&I initiatives sort of early 2018, and we set up the D&I AG group, which I am currently a part of. Initially, the three main areas that we looked at were gender, Maori and Pacifica, and inclusivity. But we've last 2 years achieved a lot and now re-looked at what we want to achieve in the coming 2 years. The focus has moved, or rather shifted a bit towards inclusivity, being a bit wider. So yes, we're a diverse organization. We have people from all over the country belonging to different sexual orientations, religions, countries, but how do we move towards being a more inclusive environment is what we're focusing on. So the three main areas that we looked at in the past were gender, not just being women in leadership or keeping mid-career women in the industry, which I'm sure a lot of you know is a bit of an issue at the moment in the engineering industry, is we tend to see a good pipeline, a strong pipeline of young females coming into the business. And then as we get to sort of mid-career, you tend to just see a bit of a drop. And we're trying to understand a bit more of it and how do we keep that talent within the business. That can be, you know, having robust parental leave policies, having robust flexible working policies, and ensuring that everyone, the accessibility is there for everyone. We've got to focus on Maori and Pacifica, and we're doing a lot of work in the Maori space probably in the last 2 years, not so much in the Pacifica, and it is something that is a learning for us, and we are going to be looking at improving that in our next 2 years. The key areas with Maori was looking at a pipeline to ensure that we've got young students right from, whether that's from school, university, early career, and then progressing them through their whole career pathway, not just sort of having tick boxes of we need this many percentage of people. It's actually about something that is meaningful to and giving back to something that is a very important part of New Zealand. The other part was inclusivity, which we mainly focused on Rainbow Tech, and that was to allow us to have a bit of a platform on and a resource on what are we doing right, what are we not doing right, and then looking at how do we make that meaningful for our people. So one of the things that we're very proud at WSP is what we launched VIBE, which is visibility and inclusion in the built environment. It is essentially a group where we put initiatives forward to make sure that our LGBTQ plus people have advocacy, have a voice, and they're essentially our subject matter experts for tell us how can we do better, because we believe that we always can do better, and what we've done so far is just a very small step to where we're going towards. So we've got initiatives like scholarships, internships, with not just the Maori and Pacific community, but with females as well. We've looked at sort of how do we move to age being another important area, because we as a industry and as a business as WSP, we have graduates, interns, and then we've got people who've been in the business 20, 30, 40 years. How do we firstly bridge that gap? How do we increase communication between those two groups? And then how do we make sure our environment is inclusive for everybody? The same being said, which is a 2021-22 thing, is to look at ability. Are our current ways of working inclusive to people with diverse abilities? Are we making it easier to be inclusive, or is it just actually speak for, hey, we are an inclusive organization, but our systems don't actually enable us to be like that? So I suppose I've got a very limited time today, so I'm just going to go quickly into what we think we're going to look at for the next sort of 2 years is predominantly looking at ability. So disability and ability, how do we just accommodate and support people with various abilities? How do we have a more inclusive workplace in the sense of not just for the LGBTQ plus community, which has been our focus, but even for just everyone. What are we doing right? What are we not doing right? And if there's any questions, I'm happy to talk a little bit more later on about what we've actually specifically done, but I think I'll leave it here for now. Over to you, Alex.
Awesome. Thanks, Prue, for sharing some of the work that you're doing at WSP. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions that will follow on from that. Our next speaker for this afternoon is Lisa Tai. Lisa was born in Suva, Fiji, and is of Rotuman Fijian descent. Her family moved to New Zealand in 1987 after the first coup in Fiji for better education and work opportunities. She studied economics at university, but has worked in the forensic field for the last 15 years. She has 2 children, Kailani, age 7, and Kanoa, age 3, and has been married to her husband, Junior, for 11 years. Lisa has worked on several large, high-profile and complex investigations over the years for both the private and public sector. Her key passion is providing visible opportunities and pathways for Pacifica people in the professional services, technology, and corporate sectors. I'd now like to welcome Lisa.
Awesome, thank you, Alex, appreciate it. So just to kick us off, if it's okay with everyone, I'll just do a very short introduction in my mother's native language, which is Rotuman, so please bear with me. No ia e Māori, o tuasa le Lisa Tai, no e West Auckland, Foyexia ngangatra takoa. So hi everyone, thank you so much for the introduction, Alex, and a big thank you to Infrastructure New Zealand and the Emerging Talent Network for inviting me today. It's a real pleasure to be here. But before I start, look, I do have a confession to make, or a couple of confessions. I'm not by no means an infrastructure expert or even an inclusion or diversity specialist. However, I am an expert in my own story. And so just in terms of what I'd like to share today, I just thought setting the scene in terms of my journey of being a migrant to New Zealand and having worked in a space for 15 years, in a space where there aren't that many people that look like me or have a similar background, might be just quite useful context to kick off the Q&A. So for context, as Alex mentioned, I'm in the risk advisory team at Deloitte and have worked in forensic and specifically financial crime for the last 15 years. And 15 years feels like a really, really long time, but it does include a stint in Mumbai on secondment, a couple of maternity leave breaks, working remotely from Fiji, and also assisting with the establishment of our risk analytics team. So the 15 years has definitely flown by. So that's with one hat on, and with the other hat, I am super proud and feel really blessed to be leading Deloitte's Pacifica Services Group, which is called PASPO, which we launched earlier this year and has been an amazing career highlight for me. In terms of translation of the name PASPO, it literally translates to break through waves in Rotuman, and it really does serve as a metaphor to describe our aim to do things differently and to really challenge the status quo in order to deliver better outcomes for our Pacifica community. So within PASPO, we have 3 focus areas or 3 groupings. So one is around talent, which really is about increasing representation for Pacifica people at Deloitte and across the wider industry, including Big 4. The second is around community. So what can we do as a firm in terms of resources and time to give back to our Pacifica community, which is a really, a key growing community for New Zealand in whole. And third is around the business. So we're really focused on client initiatives, engagements that build capability. And we talk about building capability a lot, and it is really important for us. And for me personally, what that means is bringing the best of a global firm like Deloitte to our community, but ensuring that Pacific values like respect and spirituality, reciprocity and collectivism are front of mind and demonstrated authentically in our engagement with our clients in the wider Pacific community. So I probably have 2 minutes left, and I've thought quite hard about what messages I'd like to share today. And so I just thought I'd share a little bit about my journey as a Pacific professional in a Big Four, and I guess what I've learned along the way, and then just really briefly starting to share the tips for, or my tips for young Pacific professionals and for employers. So really quickly, in terms of my journey from Fiji, my extended family, cousins, aunties, uncles all still live in Fiji, and Fiji is very much home for me. My parents made the brave decision to move to New Zealand back in 1987 for better opportunities. And it's a decision that I'm forever grateful for. And it's a brave choice that many other migrant families and parents make. When we moved to New Zealand, we moved to West Auckland, and I've been a Westie ever since, so for about 30 odd years. And West Auckland is a pretty diverse place. So, when people ask me, what are your experiences as a young Pacific person? To be completely honest, ethnicity, race, background wasn't really a thing for me. And maybe it's just me being naive, but it wasn't an issue. I went to a diverse school, I went to a diverse church. We're really connected with our Auckland Fijian community and Rotuma communities. It just wasn't really an issue. And it wasn't until I reached university, probably in my second year, where the lack of diversity and representation became quite apparent. So I did a business degree at AUT, I specialised in economics, and I went from having a really diverse first year cohort to essentially being the only Pacific person in my class for years 2 and 3. And then after uni, to be honest, again, still didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I needed to find a job and was really lucky to get a job with a small boutique firm called McCullum Peterson, which I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the small environment. And then with about, I think 2 or 3 years, we merged with Deloitte. And if I'm being completely honest, and I know I have some Deloitte colleagues on this webinar as well, it was a complete shock to my system, and it would be of no surprise to anyone that our firm and other Big Four, other corporate firms have a lot of work to do around increasing representation for Māori and Pasifika. That's not a secret to anyone. And for me personally, the first few years, and probably the first 8 years, I really struggled with my identity in the workplace. So, sort of on reflection, subconsciously, I was doing everything I possibly could to not be noticed, to not stand out, to blend in as much as possible with my non-Pasifika colleagues and clients. And the reason being, I was really nervous that someone would come to me at my seat, tap me on the shoulder and sort of say, hey, what are you doing here? Who let you in? And on reflection, it sounds silly when I say it, but as a person in a space where there aren't that many people that look like you or from the same background, it's a really common internal struggle from what I understand. And, some may label that as imposter syndrome. And so I guess on reflection, if I jump ahead 15 years, right now I am really comfortable in my own skin, and I've probably gone to the other extreme where I am really loud and proud about being Pasifika. Everyone I work with knows where I come from. They know how to say hello in Rotuman. They get reminded of all the Pacific language weeks. I wear bright coloured clothes. It's very much you describe it as a visible part of my identity now, and that's been a real journey for me. And if I was asked, sort of what is the secret to that, sort of, if I could fast forward 15 years, I'm still trying to work it out. But I would say for me personally, I think it's come with time. It has come with getting older and wiser, and having 2 kids does change you. But the aspect that has helped me the most is I've found my people, found my advocates, I've found my group within the workplace, which includes both colleagues and clients. I have a group of people that I can go to for advice, people I can complain and vent to, but who also do a really awesome job at reminding me of why I'm here, which I think is really important for our Pacific people, especially young people. So in terms of advice and tips, and I'll wrap up soon because I'm probably gone over my time. In terms of advice or tips that I'd have for young professionals, particularly for young Pacific professionals, I would say it is really important to stand true to who you are and to your story. It won't be easy, but don't lose hope, and you've got to find a way to use your story and your personal experiences as an advantage. It makes us different, it makes us unique, and people love that. And also, just like to add, it is really hard to be the first. It's really hard to be the only one for anything, but someone's got to do it, and why can't it be you? And then in terms of employers, I'm sure we'll get some of these questions through Q&A, but I would like to share, in terms of representation for Māori and Pasifika in corporate spaces, recruitment is really important. It's really, really important, but equally important, if not more so, is actually retention, promotion and recognition initiatives that you have for your Māori and Pasifika staff. It's critical, because they will be your main weapon in terms of recruiting more Pasifika to your workplaces. So I know recruitment is a really big focus for lots of P&P teams, but for me, it's sort of how do we look after the people that we do have and make sure that they are being promoted and progressed within the firm. So I've probably gone off my time, Alex, so I'll wrap up, and I look forward to the questions through the Q&A, but thank you so much for the opportunity. Thanks, Alex.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Lisa. It's really awesome to hear a little bit about your story, and it's also awesome to see that you now feel comfortable bringing your whole self to work. Our next speaker for this afternoon is Fuzela Raza. Fuzela's family is originally from Fiji. They migrated here in the 60s as students, and her parents met and married here in Tamaki Makaurau. She was born here and has a son aged 11. As a member of the Muslim community, Fuzela has learnt the most and loved working with refugee, migrant, and ethnic communities. As a sector leader with over 20 years experience, Fuzela is excited by the opportunity to shape best practice and drive the next generation approach to diversity and inclusion. She's passionate about creating real change that makes us more inclusive and diverse across organisations and communities. I'd now like to welcome Fuzela.
Kia ora koutou everyone, and thanks Alex. And I'd just like to acknowledge Prue and Lisa. Really enjoyed both of your talks and keen to have a conversation. So today what I wanted to do was to, I guess, build on what Alex has already talked about in terms of the critical nature of D&I. And when I was preparing for this, I changed tack a little bit since we've been, trying to do this over the COVID period, because I really wanted to place D&I within the context that we're operating right now. So in addition to the challenges that COVID is bringing, we also are operating in this social context of Black Lives Matter, and a kind of a consciousness raising and revolution that's happening globally, and that I think many of us who have worked in communities or part of communities are asking, what does this mean for New Zealand, and what does this mean for our communities? And one of the real, I guess, opportunities, but also challenges that present any of us working in this space, is the recognition of the differential impact on women, Māori, Pasifika, and other vulnerable, and I say vulnerable groups, not to homogenise those groups, but to recognise some of the disparities that exist already. That if we don't recognise this and see an opportunity to address it, we may be taking steps further back. So in my role at Auckland Council, one of the things that we've done over this COVID period has been to start to look at our own data and to try and understand what this might mean from a data perspective, which I do believe is really important, as well as understanding it from a whole person perspective. And we're really lucky at Council that we have these amazing, strong networks, very strong Māori, Pasifika, LGBTQI, rainbow community, Christian networks, Muslim staff networks. We have a range of really well established, strong networks that, part of our role is to support, who also speak to the impact on them as communities within Council, but also as part of the wider community that we are set up to serve. And one of the things that we got to do over this time, which I found personally very rewarding, was work with Auckland Emergency Management and other organisations to help build some communication and understanding of what was happening for diverse communities over this COVID period, and how could we improve our response to that. And our internal staff networks were great leverage for this. So, this is a really important area for us. And I've just got on the slide just a few stats that are emerging, and we still don't have, great data at the moment, but we know that there is a differential impact. So building our strong relationships internally with our staff networks and leveraging those to connect with community is really important for us. And I think for any of us in this D&I space, and Alex, you talked about it at the beginning, one of the real challenges is that happens is where organizations are under pressure, under financial pressure and all kinds of pressure. And it's quite easy to see D&I move into the nice to have rather than must have. And so I think it's critical that we're always able to keep reiterating, I hate the term, but the business case for why we need to do this. And I think the greatest rationale for why we need to maintain diversity, apart from the obvious kind of equity focus, is the fact that we're facing these unprecedented, complex social and economic challenges. And we know for a fact that diverse teams and inclusive organisations are going to fare better at addressing those and solving those than ever before. So I like to keep reiterating that in any of the work that we do. Tara, if we could go to the next slide. Now, sorry, this is a very dense slide, and I only want to just touch on this to say that unfortunately at Council, like many organisations, we're having to restructure and look at change processes to optimise the business and to make some savings in line with what's happening globally. And one of the things I wanted to touch on is right now what's critical for us is that we keep an inclusion lens across those changes. So at the moment, myself and my team, and we work very closely with our Māori outcomes team, we have a separate team, a separate number of specialists who work on Māori outcomes in our organisation. We are all working with change teams and people leaders to help them look at probably three key areas. The first is, what is the potential impact of proposed change on diversity within their teams and within their divisions? What can we do to prime and brief and help people leaders to manage the unconscious bias, which we know is going to be triggered under times of pressure, and it's our sort of our default that many of us will go to when we are having to make these hard decisions. And how can we make sure that we are implementing the most inclusive recruitment principles as we are choosing who to select and who to retain in the organisation? And I think these three things for us are really critical, as well as looking at sort of internal redeployment opportunities and ensuring that we retain, at the very least, retain diversity as we go through. So that's where Council's at the moment as we go through some significant change. And I just wanted to reflect that kind of short-term immediate response that we're having right now. But I also wanted to share a bit on what we are doing, and Tara, if we could go to the next slide, which is my last slide, in building a culturally inclusive organisation. And the reason I wanted to reiterate this is I think, and it's in one of the questions I think, Alex, you sent through to us, which is about how gender tends to kind of be a very strong focus within diversity and inclusion initiatives, but actually we've got a raft of things that we need to address. And one of the things that I personally am very passionate about, because of my own lived experience and my own identity, is how we build a culturally inclusive organisation that takes into account ethnic diversity, racial diversity, and looks to progress all groups within our organisation. And so we've done some, I think, quite cool initiatives that we've been able to put in place over this time. And one of the ones that this is sort of strategic work that we're doing at the moment, in fact, we've done some work with Deloitte around this, is our ethnic and gender pay gap analyses. And this is where we start to realise that the gender pay gap is well established and we understand that, but it looks very different when we put an ethnic lens across it. And so one of the things that our organisation has mandated is that we use an intersectional lens whenever we're talking about gender, where we intersect gender and ethnicity and look at the impact of that. And when we do that, we start to see, not surprisingly, that people of colour and women of colour are at the bottom of that heap in terms of the pay gap. The other thing that we've done, which I've really found challenging and enjoyed doing, is a program called Courageous Conversations on Race, which helps us to understand how we talk about race and racism within our organisation. And it's been, I guess I won't say controversial, but it's been more of a cutting edge program that we've been able to do, but has received really positive feedback from the people that have done it. And the last 2 points which I wanted to make is around our senior appointment targets. So again, we've set targets for senior appointments, not just in terms of gender, but in terms of ethnicity. And it's slow progress in that area, but we're definitely moving forward. And I think that's really important. And I guess the program that I've been involved with, that I've been responsible for and that I've been really excited by, has been HEATA, which is our accelerated female leadership program, where we're about bringing women and diverse women into the top tiers of our organisation, into the most senior leadership spaces. And over the last 12 months that the program's run, we've had a 70% success rate of women progressing into those enterprise leadership roles, both within council and outside of council. So that's been a really exciting program. And there's a picture that's facing the wrong way there of our graduates. And the picture above that is perhaps one of our most exciting and most recent initiatives, which is a picture from the launch of our Pacifica strategy, where council is looking at how responsive it is and how we can optimise the talent that Pacific peoples bring to our organisation. And that's just been launched, and that's a picture from that launch. So I've probably gone over time too, so I'm going to end there, Alex, and hand back to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Fuzela. It's awesome to see Auckland Council placing an emphasis on all realms of diversity, and it's great to see those initiatives in place. I'd now like to invite, and thank you again, Lisa, Prue, and Fuzela. I'd like you just to invite you to turn your cameras on, and we'll run through a little bit of some of these questions and answers, which I know have probably been coming in thick and fast. I actually want to start with Prue first. This was actually a question that came in beforehand, and it was, what are some tips to stimulate interest in the diversity and inclusion space?
So that's actually a really good question, because we've had to manage that quite early on. And I think it's going to sound quite cliche, but actually actions. So actually delivering on what you say you're going to deliver on. And we specifically, just quickly as an example, probably faced that a little bit when we launched WIBE, which is our LGBTQ+ support and advocacy group, because one of the feedback we received was, well, this has been done before, you've talked about it before, but because we're the nature of our business, we're across 40 offices, often trying to get the same result or same engagement across those 40 offices can be a bit you tend to just sometimes not deliberately pick the places that you get the most engagement with, but it's actually the harder yards, the offices that are probably not getting engagement are the ones you got to focus on. So I think what we aimed for was go for the low-hanging fruit. I think that's okay. Aim to what you can do, and that's what we did with WIBE. I think that was what one of the learnings we got was, just don't speak it, actually have actions, show it to the people. So we had videos where people talked about the impact of either when they came out at work and how they felt about it, or their experience belonging to the LGBTQ+ community over the years. When that videos were then actually on LinkedIn and they were within the business as well, people looked at it and went, okay, it's not just all talk. I can be who I can be at work and not have negative impact of it. And just to Lisa's point before, maybe it is a bit of an imposter bias where you do sometimes feel, will I be impacted because of who I am? And I think taking that fear away by actually showing positive action goes a long way.
Awesome. Thank you, Prue. I agree. Definitely, there's a lot of value in showing a diverse and inclusive environment, and often it can happen behind closed doors with particular staff networks, but it's really important that it's shown and it's advertised throughout the organisation to show that it is there and it is working. I can see there's a question for Lisa, and the question is, as a young Pacific professional who is just starting out in her career, How do you navigate being in the space you are in, on top of balancing your commitments and being a mum and to your culture?
Oh, thank you, Alex, and thank you for the question. Yeah, it's a really interesting one. And for me personally, I think what's worked for me is trying not to be everything to everyone at the same time. I think, it become really, really overwhelming if we're trying to do everything 100% all the time. I've really struggled with that. You're torn between wanting to be a really good employee and being on top of your game, and then wanting to be the best mum at home. And I think it is maybe it's a harsh reality of it. It's actually just hard to achieve all of that at the same time. So I think, for me personally, to a young person, being kind to yourself. I know that sounds really cliche, but I think being kind to yourself, remembering that your career is a marathon and not a sprint, just good reality checks to sort of allow yourself time and the space to do what you need to do at your own pace. So Fuzela might have a couple of comments as well, but yeah, for me, that sort of has been the key. Is every time I've tried to be everything to everyone, it has never really worked out that well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Lisa, for those words of wisdom. I've got a question here for Fuzela. Can you give an example of how the courageous conversations have been used so far at Auckland Council?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So one of the teams or divisions that was particularly interested in this area, where we found actually the most interest in this work, because it's all voluntary, it's people who want to be involved, which I think is the right way to go for this kind of work, have been in customer-facing teams. So in libraries and in our teams that engage with communities directly. So they have used the tools. So they did an introductory course, and then they've gone in a bit deeper and done more work in that space. And what the course does, and it's not a course, it's a course that we use another provider to deliver, is it provides tools for people in terms of language approach, self-reflection tools to help understand how the dynamics of race impact interactions on a day-to-day level, be it in your team or with your stakeholders. So the initial part is a bit theoretical, but then it is applied in this way to help people have the language that they need, because race and ethnicity and racism are very hard areas to talk about, and we need a structure, and we need an agreed lexicon that we can kind of all share and buy into in a framework, so that it becomes safe for people. So that's how teams are using it.
Awesome. Thank you, Fuzela. It sounds like a really awesome initiative, and I'm sure there's a lot of good things coming out of it. I've got a question that's directed to everyone, but I will give it to Prue, and it's around inclusion and diversity groups. So how have you found success in implementing change? Was it a matter of the inclusion and diversity groups getting senior leadership on board, or were there policy-driven changes that have been left with D&I groups to implement? Question.
Yeah, so interestingly, a bit of both, and a lot of both, I'd say. So you definitely need backing from the leadership team, and we were quite lucky, I should say, quite lucky at WSP. We've got very solid backing from our MD Ian Blair and our sponsor for DNIG is our CFO, Erica. So it's quite helpful when you've got the messaging is right from the top and it filters through all the levels. To Fuzela's point, it's not, when you have it from that level and it's actually a part of your KPIs, it's not an option, it's an expectation. And often cultural change starts with expectation. So I know it feels a bit like we've got some KPIs that you have to deliver on, but that prompts a lot of positive, possibly reluctant people to just get on with it, and policy driven to a large extent. So often some of the feedback we would get, you can't make changes sometimes without sort of going, this is what we want. It also ensures consistency in what you're delivering across the business. So one of our very early on things we did was we looked at all our policies right from across the board, not just the people policies, and ensure that they were gender neutral. it's a very small step in the right process. And like I said, it's the low-hanging fruit at times, but those are quite important things, along with backing from your leadership team, having good processes in place, having advocates, having visible advocates across multiple levels of the business, approachable. I think all of those as a combination work really well to hopefully getting you one step closer to where you want to be.
Awesome. Sounds like very much a top-down, bottom-up kind of dual approach. And I think, Lisa, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, probably the only thing, just from our own experience with PassPL and getting that up and running, the key thing that worked for us is actually being really clear on what the business case is as well. I know it sounds quite harsh to talk about a business case around I&D, but for us, selling the client benefits and the financial benefits of doing this properly. And it's one of those things that different people will latch onto different things around why this is important. Yes, it's the right thing to do, but it's actually a really good business decision to do it as well. So for Pacific, highlighting that Pacific is one of the fastest growing communities, 1 in 3 births in Auckland is of Pacific heritage. Looking forward from a talent and a client perspective, it's really important. So I just wanted to share that for us, where it's appropriate and needed, actually making sure that you're highlighting the business case for what you're trying to do might be a, sort of one lever that you could leverage. Sorry,
Awesome.
Alex, sorry for jumping in.
Awesome, thanks, Lisa. I've got a couple here for you, Fuzela. One is, I know you've introduced targets of senior appointments for women. People are very divided on targets or quotas. Did you feel a target was necessary, and is it working?
Yeah, I mean, targets and quotas are complex and there's pros and cons. But the short answer is yes, I did believe it was necessary. We looked at, if you look at countries like Norway, for example, where there's been significant change in gender representation, and if you look at New Zealand with the state sector boards requiring gender balance now, it'd be interesting to see how that tracks. But wherever we've seen significant improvements in representation, it's generally been driven by quotas or targets. And I guess, look, I'm not pro targets in any situation, but for an organisation like council, which is a large public sector bureaucracy, if we don't have something measurable, if we're just waiting for culture change to happen, I think for me, in this instance, I see culture change being driven by the requirement, which is just reiterating what Prue has already said, that if we make this a requirement, then we drive change in that way. And really, my belief is until you get diversity around the table, you simply won't create a culture of inclusion. It's very hard to do that when your top table is homogenous. So that's a long answer, but yes, I do believe it's complex, but I thought it was necessary.
Awesome, thank you very much, Fuzela. And I agree that in order to have diversity and inclusion, I think there needs to be carrot and stick approach in order to first get diversity at the table and then work around how you can make it an inclusive environment. I know we are running quite to time, but I think what we will do is, because there are still quite a lot of really meaty questions coming in, we'll still continue for a little while longer. But if you do have to go, thank you very much for joining us. And we hope you've taken something out of this webinar. But for everyone else, I'll keep on going. Got a question here. How do you manage disability inclusion in your respective organisations? And I will pass this to Prue. If is this something that you've started? I know you've started or may have started looking at disabilities.
So yes, and I can confess we're probably quite in the early stages of it. So I think the things we're probably looking at are the usual ones. Are buildings accessible to people with disabilities? Are toilets accessible to people with disabilities? Those are sort of the ones for partially external facing, but internally, for example, if you do have someone with a hearing disability, do your systems sort of allow them to still be able to function to the best of their ability? Whether your translation, because coming back to the diversity part, when you've got multiple accents and your system only recognizes one accent and types up a complete load of gibberish, then you're not actually allowing that person to be successful. Those are hindrances to allowing that person with a disability, who might have the best ideas but just doesn't have a source to be able to put those ideas forward. So yeah, those are some of the things we're just starting to look at. It is putting on a commercial hat at the same time. Those are not cheap decisions, and often in a time like COVID at the moment, would you rather revamp your building to have a toilet that has disabled access, or do you just save 3 people's jobs? So it's not always that black and white, but it's not always that easy. But this is the start of the process where now we're looking at our systems, looking at our buildings. It's a starting point, and use your people as the subject matter experts. They're the ones who will tell you what you need, and very often as well where you're not doing it right.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Prue, for that answer. I'll give this one to Lisa, and I'm sure there are a lot of top leaders at Deloitte. Thinking of top leadership, what things have you seen them do that are helpful to building a culture of diversity and inclusion, and also maybe what they do that's not so helpful?
Maybe I'll start with the helpful. It's always a safe place to start. Look, I think from my perspective, what I think has been done really well are the leaders that listen to the communities that they're targeting for advice. So I think it's, and Prue touched on it earlier, the communities that you're trying to work with and increase representation, do all these good things for, they're the ones that actually hold the keys to what you need to do. So being really authentic and engaging with the community, go, okay, what do you think about this? What are we doing right? Getting feedback, I think, is what works well. And again, it will sound cliche, but walking the talk really helps. So leaders that put this stuff in action, I think, is definitely the key, and it's a way of getting buy-in across your teams, right? So I think what is done well, and leaders that have exhibited for me are the ones that are actually listening to the community for advice and feedback. Yeah, and probably the not so well would be the opposite. Perhaps instances where we are making assumptions, or we're actually not engaging the community to come up with the answers. I think those are the times where it doesn't work or isn't as effective. If we're sort of doing research online or speaking with people externally, but haven't asked the communities internally for feedback. So it's probably my main thing, Alex.
Cool. Thank you very much, Lisa. We probably only have time for maybe one more question. And I can see there's one that's coming from Maggie, and this one's open to anyone. What are your organizations doing in the way of neurodiversity? It's quite an interesting term.
Alex, I can share very briefly because it's very limited what we've done so far, but we are starting the conversation around what does neurodiversity, what does inclusion look like for people who are neurodiverse? And we know that, the difficulty is that we only know who's neurodiverse based on them indicating that to their people leader. It's not something that we currently record as any kind of demographic. So we can't, we're at a very early stage, but the conversation has started and has actually been generated by staff who have an interest in this.
Awesome. I know with diversity and inclusion, it is a journey, and I think that there is still a lot of work to be done in all of our respective organisations. But I think the fact that we're having a conversation like this today just goes to show that we're going in the right direction. I think I'll leave it there. I would like to just thank again each of our speakers, Prue, Lisa, and Fuzela, for giving up their time to share with us their own journeys, learnings, and tips as they continue to change or be the change that they wish to see in their respective workplaces. Before passing it back to Nick, I'd like to end with a whakatauki or Māori proverb, which which hopefully leaves you thinking about what tangible actions you can take to influence change and implement diversity and inclusion within the workplace. Kei tēnā, kei tēnā, kei tēnā anō. Tōna ake ahua, tōna ake mauri, tōna ake mana. Each and every one has their own uniqueness, life essence, and presence. I'll now pass it back to Nick for closing comments.
Thanks again, Alex, and a huge thanks to Prue, Lisa, and Fuzela for sharing some of their experiences and some of the initiatives that are going on within their organizations. A huge amount of calls to action there, not only for us, but for some senior leadership back at our own organizations. And I think that some really good ideas for initiatives that may help to promote diversity and, importantly, inclusion, and making sure that those are measurable initiatives as well. I think for me, some of the really awesome stuff in there was talking about being able to create a culture of inclusion. You really do need to get diversity around the table to begin with, because a homogenized decision-making group is really going to struggle. And then secondly, in the context of where we're at today with these incredibly complex social and economic challenges, Fuzela's point around diverse teams are really well placed, if not best placed, to attack those head on. So a lot of things to think about as we go forward. Finally, another plug just for Building Nations on the 18th and 19th of November out in Henderson. We are really excited about this event, and it's been a long time coming, so we really look forward to seeing you all there. Quick reminder for the Emerging Talent Network that we are offering discounted tickets for you, so jump onto the link posted on that slide, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you all in November. Final plug for the essay competition closing on the 4th of October this week. Get your entries in. If you're sort of halfway through it, punch it out over the next couple of days. We're really excited to see what everyone comes up with and hopefully prompt some further conversations from there. Final thanks to Alex and the panel once again, and to Tara and the crew at Infrastructure New Zealand in the background for putting this event on. Thanks, everyone.